Two Israeli fighter planes chase after an unidentified aircraft in November 1971. Although the F-4 Phantoms are among the world's fastest planes, their speed is insufficient. Reason being, they're in hot pursuit of an MIG-25, a plane that can reach such great altitudes and speeds that it can evade any form of air defense. Nearly 10 years from now, Western intelligence will be at a loss to explain the Soviet Union's MIG-25. The Intercontinental Bomber was a relatively new type of weapon in the early years of the Cold War. It was an aircraft with the range to drop a nuclear weapon almost anywhere on the planet. The first American intercontinental bomber was able to go not only further than any previous bomber, but also at a greater altitude and quicker speed, making it very difficult to intercept. And it kicked off a decade of development of ever more advanced and quicker strategic bombers. To counter this threat, the Soviet Union developed ever more advanced fighter interceptor aircraft. By the late 1950s, however, Soviet spies knew that the United States was working on a cutting-edge bomber that would be able to reach speeds and altitudes that would leave the Soviet Air Force largely obsolete. The XB-70 was so advanced that it would have been impossible to create just a few years earlier. However, the Americans hoped to get the bomber operational in a few years. Soviet authorities immediately began to panic. As the biggest nation on Earth, it had almost 22 million square kilometers of airspace to patrol. American bombers could appear from anywhere, the north, the east, or the west, where NATO bases are located. And it would just take a small number of supersonic aircraft to completely destroy the air defenses. The Soviet Union only had a few years to develop a new interceptor to match the B-70's extraordinary capabilities. It would have to be developed with Soviet lightning speed and inventiveness. However, hundreds would need to be produced to adequately protect the country's vast airspace. To counter this threat, the Soviet Union developed the MIG-25, a powerful interceptor that could win through sheer force of will. Engineers would have to give the MiG very strong engines to catch up to the XB-70. There wouldn't be enough time, though, to create brand new ones. Instead, they used a turbojet that was developed for use in cruise missiles and surveillance aircraft. The engines were the biggest ever installed in a fighter aircraft, but they were only good for one mission. This meant that the MiG's first-generation engines only lasted for about 150 flight hours before they needed to be replaced. Some sections of the MIG-25 could reach temperatures of 300 degrees Celsius due to the intense kinetic heating experienced during interception speeds. However, mass-producing lightweight, heat-resistant titanium proved too challenging. Therefore, engineers opted to primarily construct the jet out of sturdy nickel-steel alloy, which could be readily welded together and maintained even at the most poorly equipped airfield. However, this rendered the more than 40,000-pound jet permanently immobile, despite the fact that its maneuverability was deemed unnecessary for the task at hand. The MIG-25 was outfitted with a massive 600-kilowatt radar, which could identify enemy bombers up to 100 kilometers distant and burn right through their jamming systems. 100 MIG-25s were being produced per month during the height of production, which began in 1969. The MIG-25 would change the course of the Cold War by being the fastest and highest-flying combat fighter ever. But perhaps not in the way the Soviets had hoped. The Soviet Union hosted a huge air show in 1967. Even the Americans were kept in the loop. Western viewers could even catch the coverage in their home language, English. The Soviets revealed a fleet of brand new planes, but they kept the greatest for last. Finally, in the last 10 minutes, 3 MIG-25 prototypes were launched, speeding past the spectators. This was the first time the new plane could be seen by anybody outside of the Soviet Union. The Western intelligence community was subsequently alarmed. What really had them scared, though, was how much the jet resembled designs for the United States' next-generation air dominance fighter, a plane that wouldn't be complete for another decade. Washington's military strategists were baffled by the Soviet Union's rapid advancement. As a result, within a few months, Soviet Union aircraft were setting astounding new world records for velocity and height. The media picked up on the story quickly, spreading panic that the unknown jet was superior to anything the West had ever produced. The U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff came out and said it. The USSR now has a jet that can rival or exceed our own. The United States significantly increased performance objectives for its next-generation fighters in response to the perceived danger presented by the unknown new jet. Yet, for a long time, the United States was anxious for whatever piece of intelligence it could get. Later, in 1971, Israeli radar controllers would again catch a sight of the MIG-25s, flying over the Sinai Peninsula. At a height of almost 20 kilometers, the jets were traveling at over 2.5 times the speed of sound. They followed one MiG past Mach 3 at one point. However, the planes were flying so swiftly and high that no fighter could ever hope to intercept them. Over a decade passed with the MiG-25 still a mystery and a source of concern for Western intelligence. This, however, was about to alter in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Northern Japan was suddenly overflown by the Soviet Union's most covert plane on September 6, 1976. It then skidded off the end of a runway and nearly collided with an aircraft as it attempted a spectacular crash landing at a quiet commercial airport. For most Westerners, this was their first look at an MiG-25. Even when a crowd of witnesses gathered, nobody could explain the creature's origin or how it had arrived. Isn't that absolutely bewildering? Viktor Belenko, 29, was the MiG's pilot. The authorities moved quickly to take him into jail, where he revealed that he had fled the Soviet Union in search of refuge in the United States. Belenko had been plotting his escape from the Soviet Union for months after becoming disillusioned with life there and the difficult working conditions at his airfield. His engine failed during a training exercise over the Sea of Japan, allowing him to retrace his steps and rejoin his original party. As a result, Belenko went to a height where he wouldn't be picked up by radar. He escaped Soviet airspace and headed for the nearest Japanese aviation base. But he had to find the closest airport since he was running low on petrol and getting lost. Because of the information Belenko supplied to Western intelligence, his MiG-25 was transported to a neighboring airbase, where every inch was thoroughly inspected. The shock of their lives was about to begin. Of course, the MiG-25 wasn't the swift fighter they had hoped for. The jet's huge wings and cumbersome stainless steel structure made it difficult to control. Although the engines have the potential to break Mach 3, they cannot safely maintain those speeds for any length of time. This meant that about Mach 2.8 was the limit in terms of actual usability. The MiG had a strong radar, but it couldn't see down, so it couldn't detect targets that were flying too low. The Western intelligence community is baffled by the high volume of MiG-25 production. As for other aircraft, the interceptor might have to watch out for a few scout planes. Those same outlets that raised worries of a Soviet superplane now publicly criticized the MiG as a poorly constructed machine that was basically unusable in battle. A subpar plane that definitively demonstrated the Soviet Union's technologically behind. The Soviet authorities were enraged by Belenko's defection and demanded that he and the stolen MiG be returned to the Soviet Union. While his MiG was dismantled and transported back to the Soviet Union, Belenko was awarded American citizenship. The Soviets' air defense system's most crucial components were now clear to the Americans, and they knew everything there was to know about the MiG-25. Soviet engineers worked around the clock to update the MiG-25 since it had been so severely degraded. The MiG-25 has been upgraded to include more potent and dependable engines, a more refined look-down radar, and a broader selection of missiles that can be deployed. At the same time, less modern variants of the aircraft were marketed to other countries after their existence was no longer a state secret. Nearly 1,200 MiG-25s were manufactured. Yet, despite being almost 50 years old, the MiG-25 remains the world's fastest fighter plane. A plane capable of breaking 29 records worldwide. An MiG-25 reached a staggering height of 123,000 feet in 1977, breaking a record that has not been broken since. The aircraft's original purpose was to intercept high-altitude bombers, but even export versions with a few key features removed were somewhat effective in battle. With its state-of-the-art avionics, powerful engines, and cutting-edge radar and weapons management system, this plane could strike several targets from over 100 kilometers distant in unison. As a result, the capability of earlier Soviet fighters were quickly upgraded. The new MiG-31, aiming to replace the MiG-25 as the world's most potent interceptor, would deploy cutting-edge technology in place of the MiG-25's emphasis on physical power. We hope you enjoyed this video and caught a glimpse of the rivalry between the Soviet Union and the West. If you love learning about powerful vehicles that can transform the battlefield, be sure to check out our video about the most powerful tanks in the world. We'll see you there.